So our next speaker is really a specialist in archaeoastronomy and also the sacred megalithic landscapes of ancient Cornwall. And today she's going to be sharing her research on the celestial landscape and pathways of prehistoric Bodmin Moor. So please give a warm Megalithomania welcome to Carolyn Kennett.
So I really wanted to say thank you for inviting me along to Hugh and the Megalithomania team to speak about my research. I am really embedded in the Cornwall landscape. It's where I've lived for the last 22 years of my life, and I have an absolute passion for prehistory. My academic background is astronomy, so I come with lots of knowledge about skyscapes and the stars, the moon and the sun. And I kind of decided about 12 years ago that I would merge these two passions of mine, and it's become really my lifeblood since then. I live and sleep this. And during lockdown, I suddenly felt the need to spend more time coming off the back of lockdown up on Bodmin Moor. It's not my local landscape. I live more in West Cornwall. But off the back of that, I was able to explore a lot of the archaeology on Bodmin Moor and start to think about the relationships it had to the sky. And so my talk, as Hugh said, is the celestial landscape and pathways of prehistoric Bodmin Moor. Cornwall is in the very southwest of Britain. Bodmin Moor is a high part of that landscape in the eastern end of Cornwall. It has the highest hill in that landscape, and it has a huge amount of ancient prehistoric sites there. Partly due to the fact that much of it is still rough grazing land and it hasn't had the development that has happened on some of the lower landscapes in Cornwall. Bodmin Moor is part of the granite rocky outcropping which we get all the way down from Devon into Cornwall. And the spine of Cornwall it consists of quite high ground. And Bodmin Moor is part of that. But we also have West Cornwall, the Penwith landscape further west, and with a huge amount of prehistory still on it. And also then over the Tamar into Devon, there is Dartmoor, which is part of this same granite landscape. And they have quite a lot of commonality in the types of monuments that are found in these locations. For me, the real bonus of living in that landscape is it gives me a lot of time to immerse myself completely. So I'm able to revisit sites numerous times. I'm able to spend a lot of time at certain sites revisiting for certain dates of the year when there are celestial events happening, such as solstices or full moons, or maybe the Milky Way is in a certain position. So having the ability to do that and revisit sites over a number of times gives me great insight into the way that these sites may have been positioned in the landscape in regards to the sky. I'm also an avid walker, and if I bring up the next slide, I'm a great believer that sites don't exist alone. So I think that they have been positioned with pathways. People must have had to arrive at sites and depart sites. I think that they would have chosen the site's location sometimes along certain ancient trackways or pathways, very specifically designing some of these routes and incorporating within that the skyscapes above them as well. So today I'm going to talk about some of these routes that I've found on Bodmin Moor. Some of them are much longer, extensive routes that cover the whole of the moor itself. Some of them are much shorter pathways. So I'm thinking about some of the embanked avenues. These are specific monuments that we find on the moor, or the stone rows, which are much shorter, but do incorporate that idea of walking along a monument. I'm also going to talk about pathways in the sky. So the way that the skies, the bodies and the objects in the skies move and create pathways. So I'm thinking about the motion of the sun, the moon and stars, as well as the Milky Way. I'll also talk a little bit about waterways and rivers and some of the ways that rivers and waterways may have added an additional element into the ideas of pathways. I'm a great believer that the prehistoric people were quite dynamic, that they moved frequently through the landscape. We can see that particularly with Cornwall, because Cornwall was incredibly important in a period called the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age started about 2000 BC, so about 4,000 years ago. And during the Bronze Age, Cornwall came into its own because it was a source of tin. And to make bronze, you needed tin as well as copper. And there aren't a huge amount of places to find tin in Europe, and Cornwall is one of those. And it brought a lot of people to Cornwall to trade for tin, and we find Cornish tin and Cornish gold in lots of prehistoric relics all around Europe. So there is Cornish tin has been found as far away as Israel and up into Scandinavia. So people were moving in and out of Cornwall, and they were probably using these higher trackways and higher ridgeways on which to do that, as well as using the coastlines. And the coastlines came into their own as being almost like a superhighway for people to travel round Cornwall, because it does have that very unique shape. So if people were coming to Cornwall and they were arriving in Cornwall, there needed to be an idea of destination for them to visit. And some of the destinations that seem particularly key in prehistory are quite obvious, such as this one, Trevifi. So this isn't actually much earlier than the Bronze Age. This one was put in the landscape just off the higher ground of Bodmin Moor on the southern edge. And if you're coming on the tour, we will visit Trevifi. So Trevifi-Coit's a dolmen, or a coit as it's known in Cornwall. And it's a really fascinating site. It's had an excavation in 2019 where it's found to stand on quite a large oval platform. And underneath that, there is greenstone, which has been brought to the site and laid up to form this platform of about 1 metre deep in places. And then they've erected the quoit on top of that. If you can see in the image, it's also known as a portal dolmen because it has an entranceway. And on the front side there, the granite rock which is used has been scoured. And this was done deliberately, maybe to highlight the sunlight and the quartz which is in the granite itself. So the granite bedrock of Cornwall has made it uniquely rich in many ways, because as well as including tin and gold and copper, it also includes quartz as well. And there's a huge amount of quartz found at a lot of ancient sites, particularly in Cornwall, where the people in prehistory seem to have taken a real interest in the quartz and incorporated it into their monuments. Another type of destination that people could have been visiting on Bodmin Moor are the stone circles which are found there. And it surprises people when I talk about Bodmin Moor that it is so rich in prehistory. I think most people know Bodmin Moor as somewhere that you travel through rather than a stopping place. So people will travel down the A30, which is that yellow road in the middle of this slide, and they will continue on their way down to the beaches and the tourist destinations in West Cornwall, possibly stopping halfway along at the Jamaica Inn, which was made famous by Daphne du Maurier. But they don't realise that they are surrounded on both sides as they go over this higher ground by a huge amount of prehistory, including 17 stone circles. And it's a shame that they don't explore a little further, because it is a rich location for prehistory. So those are the types of destinations that I'll be talking about during the talk. And if we're thinking about the astronomy end, I do look at alignments, and I look at significant dates, which bodies in the cosmos, and where they're going to be and what they're going to be doing on those significant dates. But I'm also very interested in some of the more phenomenological elements of sights. So I'm talking about shadow play, reflection, and things like that. And I try and the chance for me to revisit sites, because I am so local to them, and to experience them under different conditions, has allowed me to build up a wealth of knowledge about the way that a site can appear under different sky conditions. Now, Cornwall is at a latitude of 50 degrees, and this means that the sun has a swing across the horizon, which is about 80 degrees in total. These photographs were taken locally to me in West Cornwall, but I wanted to document during lockdown, when we actually couldn't originally move very far from our own properties. I started to document the movement of the sun from my local hill outside the back, and photographed sunsets every night as I could, and that carried on for me to be able to document the full swing of the sun. And it sometimes surprises people how far the sun can move during the course of its annual cycle of its rising and setting position. So, as I say, at a latitude of 50 degrees north, we get this swing of about 80 degrees along the horizon. The sun displaces at different speeds during the course of its cycle. So around the equinox, it's actually moving faster across the horizon from day to day than it does at the solstice. And solstice actually translates to sun standing still. And there are, visually, for about 5 days at the solstice, a point where the sun will rise and set. Now, if you were going to explore that with a camera or with more technical equipment, you would actually see the sun was still moving slightly as it reached its solstice position. But it's not something that we would be able to tell with our own eyes. And that kind of plays into the idea that alignments were easier to set around the solstice, but I don't necessarily agree with that. I think people were equally interested in the equinox and that equinox time of year. The other thing that the sun does is, as it rises through its daily motion, it will rise with different angles during the course of the year. So this photograph is a long exposure pinhole photography photograph that I took over the course of a week. And the orange line is the sun gradually rising one day after another. We had a week of sunny days for once in Cornwall, and that's why it's a broader band. But this one was left out for the whole year, and it faces east. And each of those lines is the sun rising. The lowest lines are at the winter solstice, whereas the highest lines are at the summer solstice. It just gives you a show that the actual angle of the sun and how far it rises in the sky changes quite dramatically during the course of the year. So if we are to return to Trevethy Coit, You may have noticed it's got this wonderful little hole in the top of its capstone. Now, the hole seems to have been positioned with some great intent. And I was lucky enough to be there on the summer solstice a few years ago. I think it was 2017. And it was 1:20, and I was able to watch the sun rise high enough in the sky to shine directly through the hole and make a circular light beam on the ground below. Now, the reason why it was 1:20 was we were on British summertime, so that gives us that difference in hour. But in Cornwall, we are 5 degrees west from London, which means that we have a 20-minute difference in the highest point of the sun to what would be recorded in London. So in the Neolithic, when this was put here, this effect would have been seen over a longer period of time because the sun would have actually risen higher in the sky than it does today. And that is because the tilt of the Earth has changed a small amount since the Neolithic. It used to be 24 degrees, it's now 23.5. And if you think once you start moving that tilt of the Earth, the sun is going to rise and set at a slightly higher angle than it does today. So back to Bodmin Moor and these ideas of longer pathways. One of the ones which has perhaps been acknowledged in some part by research from different people is a pathway which links into Brown Willie. Brown Willie is the tallest hill on Bodmin Moor, and it's the tallest hill in Cornwall. It's quite a dramatic hill, and it has a huge amount of prehistory within its own vicinity, but it also seems to have a lot of prehistoric sites linking to it from quite large distances. And it's amazing how visual Brown Willie is from a long way away. You can actually see it from Dartmoor. You can see it from St Agnes, and as you get to Carnbray, near Redroof, you can start to see Brown Willie if you're studying the right locations. So it's quite obvious then that over the moor you're going to get these glimpses of Brown Willie. But certain sites seem to have been positioned deliberately to see the summer solstice sunset set over Brown Willie. And there's this long line of sites that have this alignment with it. It starts with this barrow cemetery on Carradon Hill. Now, Carradon Hill has a number of barrows. It has 27 at the last count. But quite a few of them are located along a ridgeway. And Brown Willie is quite a long way away. I'll see if I can get this pointer working. There it is. And that would be the location that the summer solstice sunset would set from Carradon Hill. Moving off Carradon Hill, you get into the Minions area, and you are actually going to an area which is renowned for its prehistory. It includes the Hurlers triple stone circle. It has 2 stone rows. It has standing stones. It has more barrows. And the next site was, which is on this line, which has this connection to Brown Willie at the summer solstice sunset, is a standing stone which was only uncovered very recently in 2016. There was an archaeological dig called Reading the Hurlers, and it was anticipated that the archaeologists would have a look under a number of stones above the triple stone circle. So we're just on the rise of slope going above this triple stone circle, and what had been the question at that time was there a 4th circle to be part of this monument? There was these earth-fast rocks which looked like they were laid out in a circle, and people had seen this and had suggested that an archaeological investigation was needed. And so the local archaeological group got together with volunteers, and they started to uncover these rocks to have a look under them and see if they could find any evidence of them ever being standing up. So looking for post holes or any deposits or things like that. Now, they didn't find a stone circle, but what they did find was a single menhir, so a single standing stone. And the standing stone is currently on the surface. It's been left on the surface, so it's not been reburied or anything. But if you are to visit this standing stone on the summer solstice, you will see that the sun will be setting over Brown Willie. This is actually the summer solstice, and I was on my way over to the next site, but the sun is already arching down. Brown Willie is actually there. You can't really see it, but it's actually going to come down and set. I didn't realise at the time, but Stuart Dow, who helps out with the book site, he was actually going to take a photograph from this site that night. So I know he's got photographs of it on the summer solstice. Now, I was carrying on my journey, and I was going to Craddock Moor Stone Circle, and I was able to see this summer solstice sunset over Brown Willie, and here it is a bit more in closer focus. And the difference in the sun's position to how it would have been when Craddock Moor was put in position would have been about 2 solar widths. So it would have set 2 solar widths to the right of where it is going to set on that photograph. So it would, in effect, be setting right up on the ridgeway of Brown Willie. Now, locally to Craddock Moor Stone Circle is another site called Craddock Moor Embanked Avenue. Now, this is a bit more of an ephemeral site. It's very difficult to make out on the ground. It's an unusual site. It's 2 banks running quite a long distance, and along them there are cairns. So these are groups of stones which have been piled up as cairns, but with this avenue itself creates a line along that summer solstice sunset line, and facing back towards Craddock Moor, you would get the winter solstice sunrise over Craddock Moor Stone Circle on the ridge above. So it seems to have been a deliberate attempt to mark the summer solstice or the winter solstice in this location. Additionally to this, there is a stone row which acts as a terminator to the embanked avenue. It runs perpendicular to the end of it, so it's like cutting off the space itself. And you actually turn onto the stone row, and you are then facing, as I say, perpendicularly 90 degrees to the direction you would have been heading down the embanked avenue. And once you're on that stone row, you would actually see the summer solstice sunrise and the winter solstice sunset at either end of that. So there seems to have been a deliberate attempt at Craddock Moor to tie in the solstices. Now, Craddock Moor Stone Circle was identified by John Barnett as being solstice aligned. So it's not just this alignment to Brown Willie at the summer solstice sunset. There is also a summer solstice sunrise over Stowe's Hill, another local hill, and then a winter solstice sunrise over Carradon Hill, where we first saw those barrows. So it's on an unusual part of the moor. It's kind of a non-place, and you wonder why a prehistoric site would have been positioned there. But once you start unlocking these ideas of the solstices, that's when you start to understand why they would have actually positioned it where they was, to tie in with these greater hills on the moor side itself. Now, moving along this same line, you actually reach another stone circle, and this one's Godiva. Godiva is quite a tricky one to access at the moment. It can be accessed through the plantation. So there is this modern plantation which has been put in next to it, which limits those viewpoints. But there is a photograph in the Morab Library, which was taken in the 1930s, before the plantation was put in place. And Brown Willie is just there. So it's still quite a distance away, but it's very visible from that stone circle. And the summer solstice sunset, once again, would be setting over Brown Willie. Godiva is very typical of the stone circles found on Bodmin Moor. Unfortunately, it had some restoration done in the early 1900s, which meant some of the stones were put in either upside down or facing outwards. But it's very distinctive in its location on this higher ridgeway, because most of the stone circles aren't actually positioned on the ridgeways. They're more positioned in bowls, and quite a few of them have sacred northern hilltops attached to them, and that's something else which was picked out by John Barnett. Godiva doesn't seem to have that, but it is on this solstice line, which makes it interesting. So we have this line across the moor to the summer solstice, but that's not the only thing which seems to have been of interest of laying out for people in relationship to Brown Willie itself. And they seem to have also been interested in laying out sites in relationship to Brown Willie for the equinox. And the equinox sun would rise in the east and set in the west. Now, I find that quite interesting because even though we've had that tilt of the Earth, that east-west relationship is still there today. And if you are to go and see a sunrise or sunset at the equinox, you would actually be seeing it exactly how the people in prehistory saw it. And I find that a really nice thing to go and think about and do. Now, recently I've seen people talking about equilux. So one thing that people often say about equinox, which isn't quite correct, is that it's equal day and night. Well, it's not really, because if you think, even before the sun rises, there is light in the sky, and even after the sun sets, there's darkness. Now, the equilux is a slightly different measurement, and that's done off the actual top of the sun as it reaches the horizon, and the top of the sun as it disappears. And some people feel that that would have been more significant to the people in laying out. It actually makes the alignment a couple of days different to an equinox alignment. So you will find an equilux alignment would occur a few days before the spring equinox and a few days before the autumn equinox. And it is quite interesting, but I'm finding sites sometimes are aligned very kind of generally around that east-west. They're not bang on, but they're certainly not more all aligned in that direction either towards the equilux. As I said, the sun is moving it's displacing quite significantly at that time of year. And a few cloudy days either side, you might miss that equinox alignment. But I still think it was important to people, and particularly on Bodmin Moor, there are a huge amount of sites which seem to be tied in to the equinox itself and those east-west alignments. So back to this Brown Willie, and Brown Willie in Cornish is known as Bromwinelli. It's also known the Hill of Swallows, and it's, as I say, such a significant hilltop in that landscape. It does have another hilltop next to it called Tor, which is also absolutely covered in prehistory. But as a focus for this whole landscape. Brown Willie seems to have more of these long sight alignments attached to it. On the top of Brown Willie, there are two cairns which have been built. And the two cairns are one at the north end of Brown Willie and one midway down. Brown Willie itself actually runs virtually north-south, which makes it obvious then, if you're going to start positioning these cairns, you can either see them from the east side of the hill or from the west side of the hill. The two cairns here, so there's the northern cairn, which is the one that perhaps people are most familiar with because that's the one that you would walk up to and has the trig point next to it. It gets additional stones added onto the top just to make it that little bit higher up there. And then there's this mid-cairn, which people don't tend to walk down to, but is a really significant cairn of rocks halfway down that ridgeway. They are both very visually obvious from both sides of that hill. So even if you're on the east side of Bodmin Moor or the west side, you can see these two cairns. If we were to think about positioning of prehistoric sites, you might want to think about the relationship of those two cairns with some of the prehistoric sites. And when I started looking at the sites that fell either on the eastern moorland side of Brown Willie or the western side, then I was to find there was quite a strong relationship between a number of the prehistoric sites and these two cairns. So if I was to go and visit for sunrise at the Equinox, and I was to go and stand at Stannon Stone Circle, I would find the sunrise would be in about here. Now, you might think, oh, that's nothing there. But if you're actually to be at the circle, there is this tiny bit of a hilltop there, which is the northernmost cairn. And the northernmost cairn is directly east from Stannon Stone Circle and would have that sunrise. The other hill in that picture is Row Tor, which is this other significant local hilltop. Now, but what they seem to have done at Stannon is to have almost hidden Brown Willie. So as you come down off the ridgeway, you start to lose Brown Willie, but they've kept just a tiny amount of it visible. And this is another common thing that you find on Bodmin Moor, is you have these reveals or these peeps at significant hilltops or hilltops that they found interesting. And they certainly have done that at Stannon Stone Circle. They have positioned it with just this tiny amount of Brown Willie visible above the horizon. And it is that position that you would have the Equinox sunrise out of its northern cairn. The next stone circle is just a short walk away, and this is Fernacre. Now, Fernacre is a beautiful stone circle and is quite well visited. It's also known to be cardinally aligned, and directly north of it is Row Tor. I haven't got that in the photo there because I wanted to show you the photo of Brown Willie with the Equinox sunrise halfway down its ridgeback over that middle cairn. Fernacre has been positioned definitely with the cardinal points in mind. So it's got hilltops north, east, south and west. But it continues on with this idea of Brown Willie having this equinox alignments. Now, if we're to move away from this side of the moor to go to the other side of Brown Willie and on to look at some sunset positions, we get to another stone circle. But this one is on the Luskernick side. So you've got the Luskernick settlement and the Luskernick hill, and Brown Willie there in the background. And this one would have the sunset over the southernmost cairn. So this cairn halfway down the ridge, which saw the sunrise at Fernacre. Furthermore, there is another local circle to this one. There is a second circle, and this one would have the sunset over the northern cairn at the equinox. So it's directly east from Brown Willie, and you would see the sunset in the west over that northern cairn over Brown Willie. Now, moving away slightly to a little more distant place on the moor, you get to this unusual triple cairn called Langsdown Down, and Langsdown Down is very visible. It's almost like Brown Willie itself. It's an incredibly visible site on the moor, and this is also related to Brown Willie at the equinox, and standing at Langsdown Down, you would get the equinox sunset over Brown Willie, which is there. So there seems to have been a real consideration about this ancient hilltop and the sighting of some of the more significant prehistoric sites on Bodmin Moor. So Brown Willie there for the equinox has got 4 stone circles all attached to it, and where you can go and watch different equinox alignments attached to those 2 cairns. It seems to have been really significant thing for them to do that and to start thinking about the layout of these sites in relationship to the sun and Brown Willie during that equinox period. There are other sites on Bodmin Moor which are related to the equinox, but I did want to talk about the moon at that time as well, particularly the full moon, and I was lucky enough to photograph the full moon over Fernacre when I was photographing the sunrise over Brown Willie. I really enjoy going out and seeing a full moon close to one of the significant solstice or equinox points. If you think of the moon as being reflected light of the sun, which it is, it's when you get to a full moon, it's working in opposite to the sun. So if you are going to see a significant full moon in the winter period, the one near the winter solstice, you are going to find a moon which is lighting up the sky and making an incredible show of itself at that time of year. So our sun would arch a very low on during its daily motion, and it rises and sets low in the south. The full moon at the winter solstice is going to rise and set way into the north and arch across the sky, almost like a summer solstice sun does. The moon at equinox is rising and setting east to west, just like the sun would. And it's almost this balance point between the sun and moon through its motion. And what you will actually find is the sun is still up and the moon is up as well. So if you're there for the sunrise, you're actually going to find that the sun has risen, and if you turn round, you will still, if it's the period of the full moon nearest the equinox, it will still be in the sky as well. So there's this balance motion between the two. And I quite enjoy playing with shadows, as I said, and if you're to wait for your shadows to form, after the sunrise, you will find that they will then point in the direction of the full moon, as will all the shadows from the stone circle itself. They will form these lines crossing the circle and point diagonally in the direction of that full moon before it sets that morning. One of the sites that I've been lucky enough to spend a lot of time at is the Hurlers, and it's an absolute amazing site, and it's been fortunate to have 2 archaeological excavations within the last 10 years. So the first one was called Mapping the Sun, and it happened in 2013. It was led by Jackie Navaskoski and James Gossett of the Cornwall Archaeological Unit. And this one came about because Jackie was at the Gloucester archives and was handed a box of photographs which had the excavation pictures from the 1930s excavations, which included some features which had not been seen before. And I will show you one of those photographs in a minute. But the Hurlers is an incredibly unusual site. It is a triple stone circle, so there are 3 stone circles leading up a ridgeway, so a rising slope, with a large barrow at the top on the horizon. There we go. The barrow is called Rillerton Barrow, and this one was opened up, and it was opened up in antiquity, and within it they found some rich treasures, including the Rillerton cup itself. There was also a skeleton and some daggers and other bits as well. But the Rillerton cup was seen as so significant, it ended up in the British Museum, and that's it next to one of the other cups, which was uncovered in Cambridgeshire much more recently. The Rillerton one is the one which looks more intact. Now, the Rillerton cup itself is an unusual vessel in that it had a spherical bottom. So although it's flat on the ground, on the shelf there in the photograph, when it was discovered, it had this spherical bottom. So it was never intended for it to be set down. It would have either passed around people or while it had liquid in it at least. So it is seen as some sort of ritual cup. And with this huge significant burial at the end of, I'll see if I can go back. There we go. At the end of these 3 stone circles, it's long been considered that the Hurlers are seen as a processional route. And you start down here and you would process up the hillside to Rillerton Barrow at the end. Now, additionally to this, we have quite a large hill there to the left-hand side. That's Stowe's Hill. Now, Stowe's Hill has been important in prehistory for a long time, even before those stone circles were put there. It has Stowe's Pound, which is a Neolithic tor enclosure. It's basically enclosing in the top of this hilltop and making it into a sacred space. And they've positioned, the people in prehistory have positioned a large amount of rock, cairn rock type, and made this feature where you probably didn't have an entrance or exit, it's now considered. So they've actually closed off the hilltop itself. And then they've lived down the back of the spine of the hill beyond that. Surrounding the Hurlers, as well as Stowe's Hill, are, as I said, the Rillerton Barrow, but there's also standing stones called the Pipers, which are seen as almost a portal entrance, double standing stone. But there's also the new standing stone, which I showed you earlier, which was part of this investigation into a 4th stone circle, which was the second archaeological dig on that hillside. But the triple stone circles themselves, because of their spatial look, have often had people consider that they might have a relationship to Orion, particularly Orion's belt. And if you look here, you can get the idea that Orion's belt is these 3 brightish stars in the sky, and the actual layout of the circles may have related to those stars. Farnborough cursors has also been suggested to have a relationship to these 3 stars. Now, the cursus at Farnborough is slightly different to the stone circles at the Hurlers, in that the cursus themselves have entrances and exits into the central area, and those entrances are aligned to those 3 stars rising at a time of year. So you can see that there is a definite relationship between the 3 stars and the Farnborough cursuses. Now, the triple stone circles at the Hurlers don't have defined entrances. So we have an axis of the way that they are laid out on the hill, and this idea of free circles maybe matching these stars. During the 2013 investigation, there was a group of people took torches into the Hurlers and lit the torches up to show this relationship possibly with Orion's belt. And the photograph was taken off the Caradon Hill, and you can actually still see that brown Willie is there in the background. And these are the three, 1, 2, 3. Now, when I started to look at this idea about Orion and a relationship to the Hurlers, it was interesting, although there didn't seem to be any obvious alignments. So Orion in the Bronze Age would have risen over Caradon Hill, but risen towards the eastern end of Caradon Hill, where there wasn't so much prehistory. And there didn't seem to be any obvious alignments with that. But one of the alignments that I did do some investigation into at the Hurlers was the motion of the sun itself. And the central circle has a standing stone, which is not part of the outer ring, but is standing not centrally, but to one side. And if you come on the tour, I will show you this. Now, stood at this stone, there is a small earth-fast platform of granite, which you could stand on and look over. And in the distance, you've got Caradon Hill there with the radio towers to the right. But in the distance, there's another hilltop, distant hilltop, called Kit Hill. And that has the Equinox sunrise rise out of it. And that's going to be important to the story, but I will come back to that in a minute. But this 2013 excavation, the photographs uncovered this, which is a pavement or a pathway, and this actually lies between the northern and the central circles. It's made up of all different rocks. There is a variety of rocks there, most of them hand-sized, some of them slightly bigger. In the centre of it, there is a very pointy, larger pyramid-sized stone, which is made of quartz, which is there. But if you can see, it's a very defined kind of edge to it. Now, they've made it very linear. But there is a gapping, which you can't see in this, where it actually splits off into two, and it gaps either side before it disappears. Now, this, as I said, falls in between the northern and the central circles. At either end of it, at either end of it is a blocking stone. So there is a stone which actually means you can't walk along this pavement and then into a circle. There's a stone which blocks your entrance. So with the bumpy and the roughness of the pavement and the blocking stone, it's never thought that it wasn't designed to be walked on. It's not thought that people would have set about walking along that. They've either walked alongside it or they've gathered there. We did some investigations off the back of the excavation here. So in 2013, they reopened this and had a look at this. And it actually forms on the pathway leading up to Rillerton Barrow at the top. So we did some investigations about how visual this would have been at different light levels. So we went and photographed it over the course of an evening when there was a full moon. So we waited for the sun to set, and we took photographs at different light levels, including at the full moon. And to do this, unfortunately, the excavation had finished, but we realised that we could use a piece of cloth to mimic the pavement itself. We decided to use a piece of yellow cloth because the cloth would have, the cloth would have represented the yellow clay which was used to pack the stones in. So this part of Bodmin Moor has a very distinctive yellow clay, which is quite bright and orangey more than yellow, which can stain your boots and things like that when you're walking around the moor. So we laid out this long section of yellow cloth before we took a number of images over the course of the night. And we did find that under different light levels, this area of pavement was to illuminate more under different low light conditions. So we think that people probably could have been thinking about looking at this pavement under low light conditions as well as in the daytime as well. And particularly some of the more shinier quartzine stones were really visually shiny at that time under these low light conditions, we felt. So the actual axis of the Hurlers, it's just off north. So the actual full axis of the freestone circles, the pavement leading up to Rillerton Barrow, is just off north, about 17 degrees off north. It doesn't fall in a position that the sun or the moon would rise. So I started thinking about other objects, and particularly round the equinox, when we would have that equinox alignment with the distant hill. And one of the things that interests me greatly is folklore and stories, particularly around the Milky Way. And I'm particularly interested in the way that different cultures consider the Milky Way. And we get stories coming out about the stars being part of their ancestral history. So they are either stars to do with their direct ancestors, so maybe someone has passed and become a star in the sky, or the actual Milky Way is part of their journey to the afterlife. So different cultures also talk about it as a journey, and the stars are campfires along that journey, which they will travel along to their final destination. And one of the things that was said during the excavation of the pavement was that it looked a little bit like the Milky Way. And so it had this very linear look, and then this section which separated almost like the Cygnus Rift. And some cultures actually consider the dark spaces in the Milky Way more important to their stories than they do the light areas. So it's people in prehistory would have been very attuned to the look of the Milky Way, and it's unfortunate that many of us don't get the opportunity to see the Milky Way in the way that it would have been seen during the times of prehistory before we had so much light pollution. I was to find that with the axis of the site, the Milky Way would rise from the position of Rillerton Barrow, and it would actually lay flat against the horizon before the extent of it would set over the southern end. So we've got the axis of the three circles leading up to this important burial mound. We've got this pavement that looks a little bit like the Milky Way, with different coloured rocks put in it, maybe to represent the different coloured stars in the Milky Way. And there is this moment where the Milky Way, during its course of its cycle, would rise flat against the horizon before arching up and over the circles themselves. And the time of year that it would have done that is at the equinox. So we have this merging of a pathway on the ground, which maybe represented people's dead or people that had come before, actually merging with this pathway in the sky, and the two are meeting at the horizon. And I think that could have been seen as significant to the people who built the Hurlers and built this pavement. Now, I also like the idea of reflection, and I wanted to talk a little bit about a recent investigation which has been happening on Bodmin Moor. We've been lucky enough to have another excavation up there, and this is at King Arthur's Hall, which is this Unusual, possibly prehistoric site. Maybe it's not a prehistoric site, but we're still waiting for dating results to come. Now, it's a rectangular feature on a piece of moor which is near Brown Willie and Row Tor. So it's over on that northern edge of the moor. It's a very damp feature, which probably had water in its base, or definitely had water in its base at some point. Now, there is, as I said, there are questions over how old King Arthur's Hall is, and the recent investigation has taken samples of pollen and also of the soil to see the last time the soil saw daylight. So they will get a good dating evidence for it. Within the rectangular feature, it's an embanked feature which has these kind of standing stones around the edge. And the standing stones themselves fall round the edge, and there are gaps. And it's difficult to know, though, if they are still in position in places, or if they've slipped, or if they were part of the original monument, or if this is an evolved monument. King Arthur's Hall is awaiting this moment, which is going to happen in hopefully the next few weeks, where we will find out so much more about the original history of that site. It has been linked to reflection and the ideas of the sky reflecting into the base of it. So people could have stood on the bank at the edge, and the bank would have made the water very flat, so it would have limited the amount of wind and disruption of the water on the top. So it would have made reflection quite an interesting prospect. But one of the things which came out of the investigation, which I found quite interesting, is they had some geologists look at the stones which are part of this. And the stones themselves actually came from just the immediate locality. And this has been found to be very different to the actual stones in the nearby stone circles. So Fernacre and Emblands both have stones which have been moved from quite far distances across the moor to form them as monuments. So it shows a deliberate choice being made in the type of stone that they wanted to use in these Bronze Age stone circles, and they've brought them distances across the moor and making those choices. That was also found to be the case at the Hurlers as well, and some of the stones at the Hurlers have come quite long distances across the moor to form those triple stone circles. King Arthur's Hall, unfortunately, doesn't seem to be the case. They seem to have just used stones either from the middle of the hall itself, where they've been digging it out and they've positioned stones there, or they've just used them from the immediate locality. It doesn't mean that it's not a Neolithic monument. The other option for King Arthur's Hall is that it's an important drift pound. It actually falls on the boundary of two landowners' sites, and it would have been a significant space for them to show their power and their status within the location that it is. And so it's going to fall one way or the other. But what I will say is if it's found not to be a prehistoric site, prehistoric people were certainly moving across this landscape in numbers. And it's an incredible part of the moor because it does have this huge boggy area down the bottom which kicks off a lot of mist, and it makes the whole area have this kind of otherworldly feel about it. And very close by, there are freestone circles. There's two Emblands Downs and one at Lees. So this one is Lees Stone Circle, and it's kind of not the most impressive stone circle on the moor, but it's unfortunately had a boundary bank built halfway between two sides of it. But it's thankfully it's survived even that, and it's survived some of the more recent farming. Its position, though, is quite interesting in relationship to water, in that it's on a slope which leads down to a riverbed, and it's on this riverbed which kind of curves down round slowly down on its eastern side, that people could have stood at Lees and watched the reflecting sky happen down below them. It's quite a stagnant part of the river. So what I was going to show you is the course of the day, the course of the night, with the Milky Way rising as it rises down on that riverbed below Lees, and it would rise flat against the horizon as it would have done at the Hurlers before arching up over the circle itself. And the time of year it would have done that would have been the equinox. So there are some shorter pathways on the moor, which I did want to cover as well. We've talked about Craddock Moor and Banked Avenue. There is another Embanked Avenue at Row Tor, but Row Tor also has a long cairn, and then there's quite a few stone rows as well. They're often attached to other locations. So the Hurlers, as I said, has 2 new stone rows found near it, and there are stone rows at Laskernick and other sites which have monuments as well. The Laskernick stone row is typified by having this run to Brown Willie there in the background, but it also has this wonderful thing that happens at a lot of the stone rows on Bodmin Moor, in that it has this peep of another hillside, and it's at the terminal of Laskernick that you will suddenly see Row Tor peep out. And the final site I wanted to talk about as a pathway idea is the Row Tor long cairn. Now, this is a site which falls on the northern slopes of Row Tor, and it's often, as you park in the car park and look across to Row Tor, you would probably mistake it for a boundary, of an old field boundary, or a part of the actual ancient settlement, because Row Tor has a huge ancient settlement with a lot of hut circles and everything. But this is a monument. It's a long cairn, and it's unusual in that it has 3 parts to it. It has a very long, significant, quite wide, well-built part to it, and then it turns, and it turns slightly in its axis, and it has a kind of less well-built, but about a third of the length of the original, and then it turns again, but very poorly built and very short end to it. Now, if you are to visit here around October, and you go up to the bottom of the long cairn at the lowest part of the slopes, you're going to find that the sun rises up the length of the long cairn. So I took this photograph, I think, on about the 29th, 30th of October. So I know many of you will start thinking, well, that ties in with a cross-quarter day with Samhain, and it probably does, but I wanted to show you what was at the top of this. So the focus of this long cairn is this natural cheese ring feature, which also has its own cairn built around it. So this is Showery Tor. So Showery Tor seems to have been something which was significant to them, because they've, in addition to this central natural cheese ring-like feature, they have built this cairn of rocks, this huge cairn of rocks, and then coming off the slope, they've built this long section of long cairn and then tied it in to a sunrise date of the end of October. But as I said, the long cairn itself then changes orientation. So if you go to the bottom of the next part of the long cairn, and I went up there for winter solstice, you get it coming over what is known as Little Row Tor. And here it is. There. So that's the second part, and it is rising over Little Row Tor. So the first part, and Showery Tor, is to that side. There's Showery Tor, and then this is the rest of Row Tor. So there is this third part of the section, but what actually happens as you're walking along that third part, it's not very long, is you get this bouncing, rising sunset over Little Row Tor. So it seems to have been a deliberate effort to kind of extend this long cairn and the walking element of the long cairn and what's going on with the sun and the sunrises at winter solstice. One thing that I did find quite fun when I was up there, and as I say, I do enjoy hanging around, not just watching for the sunrise, but also then watching what happens with the shadows afterwards, is when I stood at the top of the longest section of the long cairn and turned round, and this was at the Samhain one, where the sun came up behind Showery Tor, I myself became a giant, which extended all the way down the long cairn itself to the bottom. And I'm sure these are things that would have interested the people in prehistory as well. So I want to say thank you very much for listening, and I shall leave you all to it, to go and get some lunch. The timing all right?